Now, before we begin the conversation, I've just got one ground rule for my guests. If anyone at all uses the phrases new normal or unprecedented times, they will be bleeped in the on-demand edit. So with that in mind, Tom, I thought if we come to you first, maybe you could set the scene for us, because you consult with organizations around the world. What conversations have you been having over the last few months with company leaders around this whole area?
It's been an evolving conversation. It started very much with a sense of panic. People in larger organizations wanting to know how long it was going to last and what their sort of approaches ought to be. And smaller companies saying, just how am I going to survive this? Sheer panic, particularly from really small business owners. And as time's gone on, people have found strategies to cope. People have done some interesting things. They've shifted to more online business models. We know a lot of people work from home, work remotely. And now the conversation is really about culture. It's one about, okay, how do we take the lessons we've learned from this period in terms of the feasibility of flexible working, in terms of the way we maintain relationships with our customers or service users, and how do we capture those lessons and translate them into something positive that we can take on in a post-COVID environment. And so, there's lots of conversation now about that. I think we'll get into around this hybrid working model around, what are the things that have worked, what are the things that haven't, and what changes we still need to make to really make the most of some of the things we've learned over the past 3 months.
Yeah. Rebecca, your business reached unicorn status just a few months ago, but obviously you're only founded in 2015, so you've still got that kind of startup vibe, and the organization embraces home working. I was wondering, could you just quickly introduce the company for those who may not know you, but then share your working experiences through lockdown?
Yeah, hello, really great to be here. So I work for Octopus Energy. Octopus Energy we supply gas and electricity to customers throughout England, Scotland and Wales. We've got about 1.5 million customers. So we're like, we supply energy just like British Gas would, but we're a little bit smaller. And we were set up 4 years ago. We've had incredible growth since then. So I think I was employee number 34 into the business when we had 50,000 customers, and we now said have 1.5 million and 700 staff across 4 sites in the UK. And we also have operations in Germany and Australia as well. And we recently had some investment from Australian business Origin Energy, which took us to unicorn tech status. So we're an end-tech pioneer. So we're an energy company, but we're a tech-enabled energy company. So we use our own proprietary tech, customer management system, data, billing. So actually, we've always been, from the very beginning, set up to work very flexibly. So all our systems are cloud-based. We've always had remote working teams as well as office teams. And so actually when COVID happened, when we went into lockdown, we were very easily able to, everybody took their laptops home on Friday night and set up again on Monday morning. And in fact, what we found over the first few weeks of lockdown, our customer service metrics actually went up because we were so well equipped to handle remote working, both with our tech and also with kind of third-party communications channels that we use like Slack as well. So yeah, it's been helpful for us to be tech enabled in the first place, and to be able to make that relatively easy switch.
And what about, how's the communication been between teams during the time?
So we've already we've relied a lot on Slack, a third-party system, to talk to each other anyway. Even people in an office will kind of chat to each other quickly rather than getting up, going to talk to each other. But one of the things that we've done since the very beginning is Octopus, where on a Friday night the whole business will come together. When there was 6 people in an office, they go to the pub together and just talk about the week and how it went, and successes and failures, and come together. And we still do that as a business now. And actually, when we started opening up our offices, we would have a Zoom call on a Friday night. We call it family dinner, where there's a few things presented from around the business as what's happened, but actually it's generally informal, it's fun, it's community based. And actually that's worked incredibly well since lockdown. So we've had kind of 500 people plus on a Zoom call on a Friday night that people look forward to as a way of coming together and and sharing a bit of work updates and a bit of fun as well.
Jeremy, let's bring you into the discussion. What's been the World Bank's response to the pandemic, and how would you say the response from businesses in the US as compared to here in the UK and beyond?
The World Bank, of course, we're a large bureaucracy. We're one of the sort of Bretton Woods institutions. Our organisation's about 20,000 strong. Our mission to end extreme poverty and to tackle inequality, boost shared prosperity, as we call it. And so our mission right now and our work has obviously become incredibly important in current times, in the midst of the economic crisis, the health crisis that so many of the countries that we're working in are facing right now. So the work has been very demanding. By and large, we've transitioned pretty effectively to home-based working. We did a survey a few weeks ago that we're just actually refreshing now, which showed that 90% of our staff feel they're productive or very productive working from home, although we have started to go back to the office in some parts of the world. And of course, that's based on self-perceptions, and we're doing some work now to really understand the effectiveness of the organization and the areas that may need more attention. I mean, your second question, how are American businesses sort of coping? It's a completely mixed and varied picture. I think what's emerging now is that probably SMEs, the smaller, medium-sized enterprises, are having a tougher time. The larger organizations with deeper resources and more ability to react and respond, are seeing opportunities and managing to mitigate some of the worst effects. But it's very early days, and of course there's a varied picture geographically across the states as well, where the virus has sort of had various peaks and troughs as we go on.
Tom, obviously we've spoken before today about your new book, which I thought actually provided a good basis for this discussion about new ways of working, particularly focusing on this whole hybrid concept. In the book, you talk about this philosophical shift in business. Do you want to just share your thoughts on that with us?
Yeah. I think one of the really interesting things, a lot of commentators agree with this now, is that what the pandemic has done and what our response to it has done is not necessarily create anything new. There are no really obvious new trends appearing, or actually other ones stopping for that matter. What it has done is accelerated existing trends, and one of them that I started to see beforehand, but really has become much greater during this process, is this philosophical shift from what I call optimization to adaptation. And what I mean by that is, if I sat down with a CEO 5 years ago, most of the conversation about sort of future threats and opportunity would be about how can we do better tomorrow what we did yesterday? How can we avoid the disruption of our business model? Whereas now the conversation goes along the lines of, well, look, disruption's going to happen, right? I can't imagine I'm going to get through the next 5 years of my tenure as a CEO without something dramatic happening, having watched it happen in so many other industries and watching it happen to all industries throughout the course of this pandemic. And so they're now coming to me and saying, okay, well, how do we build a business that's going to be resilient? How do we build a business that's still going to have a customer base and a track record and success in a decade, 2 decades, rather than how do I ensure that my business isn't disrupted in the next 2 to 5 years? And it's a really important philosophical shift. You've seen their eyes shift to a further horizon, and it drives a lot of other behavior change as well. It changes the way people think about their organization, the way people think about their supply chain, the way people think about their people and how they train and teach them. It really drives a lot of behavior change, but it starts with that philosophical shift, and it's really been brought home to a lot of people, I think, just how realistic and how quickly disruption of any industry can come about, that something like COVID-19 can appear on with almost no notice and spread across the world as it has.
Well, we've got representatives from businesses here from over 75 years old, and as I mentioned, just 5 years old, in the World Bank and Octopus Energy, respectively. Jeremy, have you seen this shift that Tom's referring to?
So, look, I think firms have always tried to plan longer term here, and most most major corporations, major CEOs, expect to be prepared for some level of disruption in most industries. We've seen a technological revolution. We've seen huge shifts and changes. I think this current crisis has exposed a thin veneer there that actually most businesses were not really prepared for what was a completely substantial shock, not just to the external environment, but to the way they actually operated within their organizations as well. So some businesses may have been had great business models that presented opportunities and ways to survive and thrive, but they found that potentially their IT infrastructure within their own businesses wasn't sort of well suited to be able to take advantage of that. Other businesses that may have been well set up and well prepared to weather this sort of storm actually found that their business models were disrupted so substantially that they were struggling as well. So again, it's a very mixed picture. It's hard to have a sort of generic answer to this, but I think what it's shown is some core values and core areas of importance for any business right now thinking about its future. And clearly the flexibility, amazing sort of technical infrastructure, a workforce that's adaptable, nimbleness, the ability to pivot and to shift, to shift business models has been very important. So I think while all businesses probably would have seen those as being important attributes before this crisis, now it becomes obvious that they're life and death attributes for any business, the ability to respond in real time in pretty fundamental ways.
I think that phrase there, that phrase of veneer, is really interesting. One of the stats that sticks in my head from my previous research is around the relationship between a company's strategy and a company's budget. So, every year, every company of any scale puts together a strategy, says this is what we're going to do. And they put together a budget, say this is how we're going to fund it and this is what we're expecting to make. And I working with a Canadian software company a few years ago, we surveyed CFOs and FDs around the world, and 2/3 told us that their annual strategy bears, is in some cases only related to their budget at the highest level or not at all related. So effectively people say, look, this is what we're going to do. This is our objectives, our goal. And actually the quite frequently the budget doesn't support that. And for me, that's really indicative of that veneer you talk about. People have this veneer of we're thinking about the future, we're planning for the future, but it consumes relatively little time. People put relatively little investment to it. And I see this regularly because I stand up in front of companies and say, you should be devoting 1% of your time to thinking about the future. And even with that, that's 1 day every 6 months. And companies are still turning around to me and saying, how the hell can we free up 1 day every 6 months to focus on the future when we're so busy dealing with the day-to-day?
I find that totally bizarre, because I would say that probably 99% of my time is thinking about the future and how I can grow this business, and set everything up to do that. We were set up as a business to disrupt energy, and built from the very beginning to do that. Our tech is incredibly enabling to do that. It also allows us to empower our people as well. So we have a culture of autonomy and empowerment where people can make their own decisions and their own mistakes, and the company will support them. And the whole mantra is to grow this business and look after customers as we do that, or look after customers and grow the business. So
will you be a case study for my next book?
Absolutely. I mean, so it's kind of like, businesses need to. I mean, I spent many years before I moved to Octopus, I was another large energy incumbent, a large energy incumbent, a brilliant business, but it was kind of always about trying to maintain what they had, and can we get back to growth, and can we face off against disruption and avoid changes that are happening. And with Octopus, it was like let's be at the absolute pinnacle of it, the spearhead going into it. And actually, it was fascinating during COVID for us to have the opportunity to kind of put our money where our mouth is and show whether actually our technology and the way we try and work with our team would actually work in very difficult and very stressful situations. And it's not just kind of a startup talking who've got fewer customers and they're a bit more flexible and they have, and have a nice get together on a Friday night, and so that makes everyone feel good. But actually, how do you take a very large business with a very large amount of people and actually show that these ways of working actually work in the most difficult situations as well?
And I think that's a really important point. How do you sustain that culture once you've got it? Very few companies manage to sustain it for 5 years, as you've done. That culture disappears very rapidly once you start to gather any sort of scale. And to maintain it that long is really impressive, but very, very rare.
One sort of question I'd love to hear from Rebecca and Tom as well, Russell, is, we've all talked a bit about growth and getting back to growth, but we haven't yet talked about sort of sustainability and the resilience of that growth as well. And I think that's probably one of the more important questions coming out of this crisis. And we're seeing, if you look at areas, certainly, relevant for importers and exporters of these hugely extended global value chains and the shocks to the global trading system, that has to be a really important consideration. And there is clearly a danger coming out of this crisis that we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we really don't, we really don't encourage the best attributes of powerful global value chains and get back to some system of healthy trading relationships, and that we try and build that resilience by looking inwards and sort of shrinking back, and that could present a huge cost.
Rebecca, do you want to take that?
Well, it's interesting because again, we're kind of doing the opposite at the moment. We're looking very much outwards. So, we recently had this investment to take us to unicorn status, and we're using that and expanding internationally and looking at how we could take our model and the Octopus brand around the world. So we have a business in Germany. We have operations in Australia, and we're also looking at a number of active conversations in a number of other markets to launch this business around the world, this year. Using our tech, using our people, using our approach of, it's 99% about the future, as I said. There shouldn't be any walls between countries and between people. We think that what we talk about in the UK, so we offer cheaper, greener power with excellent customer service enabled by our tech here, and that's the message that we're planning to take around the world. And then there's still an enormous amount of interest in that, and we actually landed the investment deal during the middle of COVID, during the worst time in COVID, because actually Origin believed in the opportunity for growth, and I think it's obviously it's my business, so I would say this, but I think it's a great success story to know that businesses can still flourish and still expand and still grow even in, again, the most difficult of times.
To Jeremy's point about supply chains, one of the things I've seen in the behavior change I've seen, it's not that business leaders were ever uninterested in issues of sustainability, in issues of ethics, but it feels like that focus has been ramped up, like there is an increased lens on it now because of this new shift in the horizon. If you're interested in if your primary objective is delivery of results in the next 2 to 5 years, the next 12 months, the next quarter, you have a very, very different lens on the world to the one that says, what's my legacy going to be when I've left the business, and is it still around in 20 years? And as soon as you shift your eyes to that horizon, you start to think, well, okay, are there going to be, in the banking sector, any more, PPI crises? Am I going to leave behind the equivalent of a PPI crisis? And I've heard firsthand, the CEO of a major bank being so utterly explicit with his leaders about this. We cannot get even close to, if you even think we're getting close to an ethical violation, not just of that scale, but of any scale, whatever the profit potential from this is, you do not go near it. Like, we have to be cleaner than clean. We have to be, incredibly ethically sound now. We cannot, even for the most incredible profit potential, do not dare to think about behavior like that. They're looking at their supply chains. You look at the manufacturing industries, they're looking at their supply chains and going, look, okay, we've turned a slight blind eye to this in the past, but now we have to be ultra conscious of the fact that we don't just want these people to be happy today, but we want them to still be supporting us in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time. And if that's going to be the case, we need to have an understanding of their environmental impact. We have to have an understanding of their impact on their local communities. And so it's not that people didn't care about these things, but leaders are always balancing multiple objectives, multiple stakeholders. And it just feels like when you shift your eyes to that further horizon, the balance of your interests change, and it places more focus on the ethics, the sustainability issues than perhaps was there before.
This is all interesting stuff, but I need to stick to our timing on this, and I want to get back to this area of flexible working, because way before the COVID-19 pandemic, and in fact during lockdown. But way before the pandemic, companies have had flexible working. And what I was going to say is, during lockdown, there were certain companies like Twitter, which told all their employees, they could, opt to work from home permanently. And obviously, given that this is, all about PR agencies, in the PR agency world, there's been virtual agency models that have, worked extremely successfully. There's obviously been lots of positives for those working from home over the last few months. So, some people said they'd be more productive. There's no stress of traveling, spending less on lunch is another thing. But then obviously you've got to balance that with that, there's lots of people have had very different experiences, working from home, depending on, whether or not they've got the space, for example, to keep a kind of separate work and home life balance, and also, I mean, we're doing this on Zoom, but there's a lot of people have said they've had Zoom fatigue. They've been stuck in front of their screen with meeting after meeting. So a very long intro to this question, but for those companies who are not used to that way of working, what do you think are the biggest challenges that they're going to face? And Rebecca, I'm going to come to you on first for this one.
So I think COVID has inevitably speeded up the move to a more digitally enabled work future. So something we might have seen happen over the next 10 years or so has really happened over a few months, which, in many parts is good. I think more flexibility for people is good. I think people have a lot going on in their lives at work and at home. And I think, people have found benefits from being at home, being with their kids, being able to duck in and out of working at normal times and non-normal times. And actually, the businesses that we work with, it seems to actually have kind of accepted that it doesn't really matter if someone's not around for a few hours in the morning because they're looking after the kids, because they'll log in again in the evening, and actually people can work like that. I think it'll be interesting to see where it settles in terms of that hybrid, because certainly some people do struggle more than others in being completely remotely. We use lots of different channels to communicate. So as I said, our family dinner over Zoom have seen record attendance, and people who wouldn't usually join because they're looking for some companionship. And also other tools, Slack, which we use as a business tool. People talk over WhatsApp quite a lot. So people get kind of at different levels of social interaction, even digitally, and actually a WhatsApp conversation can feel a bit different to an email conversation or a Zoom conversation. But some people do struggle as well, still, with just looking at a screen all the time. So we tried to bring in various different initiatives, kind of buddying up and listening ear systems, where we reach out to people, or people know there's someone they can go to who has some training in counselling people who can help. So yeah, I would hope that most businesses will find a more hybrid way of working, and some will be more towards one side of the spectrum than other, based on how they're enabled with the tech and what their company culture is. But it's certainly been a fast forward.
Jeremy, what's your thoughts?
It's a big question. I guess the first question for any business is your business able to operate, partially or substantially, by remote? Obviously, there's a lot of areas, a lot of businesses, food production and others, that it's just not an option. And obviously, we all have the luxury of being in sort of fairly service-dominated economies where a lot of businesses are able to sort of port online. And then I guess, for us, and I feel as the bank, we've been in a good situation. It's, do you have the IT infrastructure? Have you made all those investments over a number of years to really enable you to quickly sort of port your business online? For the bank, certainly, because we've been a business that lives off travel to a lot of our client countries around the world. A lot of people spend a lot of time out of the office anyway. We were very well set up with pretty robust IT support and infrastructure. From a communications perspective, my team has almost not missed a beat. I've got a team of 75, 80, and we're working in almost every area completely effectively from home. And I've just been asked, is there anyone I want to sort of send back to the office early? And I'm struggling to think. I mean, maybe in a couple of areas of multimedia production, it might be helpful to have people physically together, but even then, it's it's not vital. So look, I think the work-life balance is the big challenge that you've mentioned, and we've seen that emerging over the last few weeks as being potentially one of the bigger issues. Work-life balance, the mental health challenges, and they manifest in lots of different ways. But certainly, the inability for some to really demarcate what's work, what's home. People, I think the expression I heard was, you're not sort of working from home, you're living at work, and that feels to capture it to me. People don't take any time out. People are not taking their leave right now. We're seeing leave utilization, that way down. partly because people are feeling, well, if I can't travel, that's not real leave anyway, so I won't bother taking any. But it's clearly not healthy and not sustainable, and we've got a great sort of mental health support team and health team that's certainly seen a really big uptick, especially for staff that are living on their own or living in small apartments and sort of, you know, suffering, you know, it's exacerbating all of those pressures on others already. So we're doing a lot of work right now in the bank to work out what are the tactics to really counter some of those effects, and some of them are just slightly banal and a little parochial. I mean, can you take Fridays off from meetings? Can you have email-free weekends? Can you encourage all these things that we've heard about before, but maybe now they're more important? Right through to more fundamental sort of thinking about how can we shift expectations, manage performance, and design, if you like, a new contract with staff. Where we do sort of, you know, move away from the presenteeism and the hours to analysing the work that gets done and really freeing staff up to genuinely work from home in a new way and not just do the work they were doing in the office at home. It's a complex sort of challenge, but I think if we're in this situation for a substantial amount of time, we've really got to answer some of these questions.
It's interesting you saying about the not taking your holiday time. I was due to be in Canada for the last couple of weeks. Thankfully, it got cancelled and we got all our money back, which was quite incredible. But I was speaking to someone and they said, "Oh, well, I guess you're going to take a couple of weeks off anyway." I was like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about it." And guess what? I've just carried on working for the last 2 weeks, so I haven't had that holiday anyway. Tom, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think there are particular challenges around young members of staff. That's my biggest concern at the moment. I think there's a broader spread of issues around culture, things like having that cultural autonomy that Rebecca talks about at the start. It's hugely important. If you've got that and you're set up to give people autonomy and responsibility, it's much easier to let people go and work remotely. Whereas if you're used to sitting over people and, you know, managing them task by task, then doing that remotely is much harder. Certainly leaves managers panicking that, you know, are people working or are they sat on the sofa on their backsides watching another Netflix box set? And so I think, you know, there's more than just having the technological preparedness, but nothing overcomes that challenge of young people in the workplace, young people who are at the start of their career, who are there to learn, who maybe don't have a great home environment to work. You know, I think back, you know, I started an agency environment. I actually started in a PR agency. And if I think about the arrogant little sod I was with the rough edges on me that only got knocked off by being around people with more experience, people with a bit of, you know, a few years behind them who, you know, slapped me around when I did stupid stuff and, you know, worked with me till I sorted out my time management and those really basic skills like how to pick up the phone to a journalist. It's very hard to do that when one of you's in one part of the world and one of you's in another. How do you, you know, write a business email? I suppose you could collaborate on that via the cloud, but much easier just to sit there around a desk and do it together. And so for all those things, I'm really worried about this conversation about the rise of remote working, because the people who can do it are people like me now, not people like I was then. You know, I've got the space to do it. I can sit in my workshop. I can isolate myself from the kids for a while, and I can do this very comfortably. But lots of people can't. And if all the people who are teaching are off in their nice, you know, villas in the Cotswolds or houses in the Cotswolds, how do the young people learn?
Yeah,
I agree with Tom on that. There's just one thing I'd love to add, which is there are some really positive effects that we're seeing as well that we shouldn't lose, because if we do eventually move back to office in my organisation, I don't want to lose those benefits. And we've heard from a lot of staff that they feel more included. So staff that used to maybe work remotely more often and dial in with lots of people sitting around a table in a very exclusive way feel much more included. And even in terms of tackling some of the hierarchical challenges of the organisation, everyone's box is the same size. You don't have the big boss sitting at the top of the table dominating the conversation. So people have felt that it's leveled the playing field. They felt that the inclusion has gone up, and they're really interesting sort of side effects that would be important to capture if we do end up, you know, moving back to older ways of working.
Okay, I want to move on. We've got still lots to cover, and I'm conscious of time because we've been chatting for about half an hour already. Tom, I want to come back to you. Not that this is turning into an ad for your book, but in your book, you talk about this concept of the athletic organisation. Do you want to just explain your thinking around that?
Yeah, it picks up on some of the things that we talked about today, and the idea is to try and communicate, you know, what it takes to be future-proof. And I make it, you know, sound a bit like the classic traits of an athlete are the traits that you need in a future-proof organization. What does an athlete have that I demonstrably don't? Number one, their senses are sharper. They seem to have a very good ability to both read the game in a strategic sense, that football brain, but also that real sort of proprioception for what's going on around them, and control their immediate environment. They've got ability to take decisions quickly, to look up, to read the game, to make that 40-yard pass and drop it on the boot of the winger. But also they're trained for the game they're in. The games change over a period of time, and so they're structured. Their physique is fit for the sport they're in. And so, my argument is that the physique of a company that was appropriate to the game 30 years ago isn't appropriate to the physique of the game now. Just like if you took the best footballers from the 1970s, 1980s and dropped them into the modern Premier League, they'd struggle desperately because the game's moved on. The same is true with business. And so I advise companies to go and look at these different categories. How do you look at the future? How are your senses? How well are you connected to the future and what's going on in your environment? And work on that and develop that. I encourage them to accelerate their decision making, this sort of second pillar, and actually do some of the things that Rebecca talked about. We give people autonomy and responsibility to take decisions close to the edge of the organization, and then look at the structure of their organization, get themselves into shape. And this comes back to what Jeremy was talking about in terms of these global networks, global supply chains, of global value chains. The modern future-proof organization is very much a network. It's not a sort of tightly integrated monolith. It's closely connected to a variety of diverse partners who support it day in, day out in its activity.
Rebecca, Tom was just hinting at the autonomy there. Do you want to just share some examples that you from Octopus Energy and how that autonomy works there?
Yeah, so we think about. I tend to think about my team at Octopus in terms of what they're spending their time doing in terms of percentages. So about 50% of what people are doing, I kind of roughly know that they're working on that build or that build or that campaign. About 25% of their time, I have absolutely no idea what they're doing because they will come up with their own stuff. And about 25% of the time, we are always ready as a team to down tools and do the next big thing. So my marketing team, we do all of our creative in-house. So my team is basic designers and front-end developers. We do everything kind of creative design, build, UX, media buying, everything, the whole 9 yards. And we do product development as well. And it means that I don't have a very rigid kind of backlog and work plan that we run through, but actually people are really empowered to come up with their own ideas. So, for example, someone in my team, our head of digital marketing, came up with an idea a few years ago to do a competition giveaway on Facebook, and we had some stuff around the office like you do in a business that you kind of been given, like we sponsor Arsenal, so there's some Arsenal footballs, and there was an Amazon Echo that we bought for something, and then it was kind of in the cupboard, Max was like, I know, I'm going to put it all in a big pink box and wrap it up and give it away on Facebook as a competition. And he brought this to me, and I had a chat with our CEO Greg about it. Greg was like, we don't do competitions. And I'm like, oh, okay. But, Max was like, I really think we should do a competition. So we kind of did it anyway. He did it anyway. And it was incredibly successful for us. We had a huge amount of engagement from it. It was one of our most successful ever acquisition campaigns. And then the next year, Max came to us again, our head digital again, and said, well, I've got another idea. I think we should give away a Tesla. And we were like, really? He was like, yeah, it'll be amazing, absolutely amazing. So we were made us feel almost quite uncomfortable, even though, I like to think of myself as pretty kind of flexible in what I let my teams do. But again, kind of Max almost pushed it through. There was some guidelines there that we kept an eye on it, but actually it was his idea. He built it pretty much entirely himself, and we launched it. And again, incredibly successful, because he knew that he was empowered to think really hard about what would actually grow this business, and took that upon himself to come up with amazing ideas.
Tom, we had a question in actually via Twitter, but it's actually from Rod Cartwright, who's part of the PRCA's Global Task Force sort of volunteer team, and it was carrying on this analogy of the athletic organisation. It was quite interesting because he said, how can the athletic organisation prepare for the 100 meters, the 10,000, and the marathon at the same time?
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental shift in culture which helps you prepare for all three. But we already have a lot of processes in place for the 100. The 100 is like the next big thing, what we're working on next. And most organizations, even if they don't do it very well, as I explained with that, and that story about the disconnect between our annual strategy and our annual budget, but they have the process in place. There's a lot you can do to refine those processes. There's some really practical things like get your finance team out of looking at last year and get them looking at next year with in a bit more depth. Take some of the load off them in terms of the processes of manually churning through last year's results and get them focused on next year and doing some scenario planning perhaps. The 10,000, that's the really interesting window for me. It's, what's the sort of the next 2 to 5 years? What does that look like? And that's really where this, carving out 1% of your time to look in a structured fashion at what's next adds a huge amount of value. And that for me is the biggest weak point in a lot of organizations, certainly big organizations, planning approaches that, what could appear on the near horizon that's utterly disruptive for our industry, and how do we turn it from a threat into an opportunity? And it's that structured process, diverse views and opinions, done on an iterative basis every 6 months at a minimum. And then that sort of thing, the marathon style is maybe your third horizon, beyond the next sort of 7 years. And that's maybe something you don't have to think about quite so often. It gets you into the realm of sort of ambitions and dreams and almost science fiction sometimes. But certainly every 4 or 5 years, it's worth doing that exercise that maybe takes more than half a day. Maybe it takes a week, 2 weeks, and a lot of engagement to reset those objectives, those missions, those goals as to where you want to be on that longer term. But fundamentally, if it was me, I'd be focusing on that 10,000 meters one, because I think that's where most people get tripped up.
Jeremy and Rebecca, given this is being produced with PR agencies in mind, and obviously you guys, as the kind of brand owners, you potentially work with agencies. Does it bother you with what working model your agency has? Jeremy, let's come to you.
So we do work with some agencies. I mean, we're mostly in-house. We have a large sort of communications team. But look, I think agencies, by and large, they've always worked in this model. They're able to be flexible. They bring together teams. They're often geographically dispersed teams to work strongly in different areas. They're always flexible. They're always good agencies are always very responsive to their clients and understand sort of changing needs and demands, even mid-flight. So I think we've got a lot to learn from some of the best agencies in terms of the way that they have traditionally approached their work, brought real creativity to their work as well. So I think in many ways what we are trying to do within my sort of large in-house communications team is to model ourselves on some of those agency behaviors. Think about internally across a big organization, how we're really serving our clients powerfully and well, how we're being flexible, how we're bringing that creativity and using every ounce of technology that we've got to really sort of deliver our work. So I think the agency model is one to look at.
Rebecca?
So yeah, I agree. I think that agencies are already quite in this way of working because they're a team not in your office who you work with. As I said, we do all of our creative in-house. The only agency resource I use is a PR agency because I think they're essential to have that little black book and to have those slightly different skill sets. But I think that we think of our agency as part of our team, and so I wouldn't cast any distinction in the way we work with them as work with them separately. And actually, sorry, I'm going to slightly segue, but it is relevant, onto the chat panel, because I was thinking about the question from Andy about practical activities to overcome, earwigging on young people's development. And I would slightly disagree with Tom. I know what you mean. There's nothing formally that kind of completely replaces that face-to-face element that you have with people, but actually there are a number of digital channels that you can use, and I think it's really important that you use all of them. And what I found that during lockdown, so I've been delighted to remove my 4-hour daily commute, so I've had more time, and I've really tried to use that time in connecting with my team and more junior members of my team one-to-one, to spend more time with them. And that's a mix of channels, so it's a kind of it's going directly with tasks to junior members of the team who I might not interact with. So I'm like, okay, I haven't heard from so-and-so for a while, so I'm going to give them something to do for me. So, work-based chat, Social based chat, how are you doing, how are you getting on? Use WhatsApp, you know, phone them, use Zoom calls. There's still lots of different mediums by which you can link with people. And again, we've used that with agencies. Our agencies are very good that you kind of have WhatsApp as a really quick turnaround, you know, for urgent stuff. We have email for slower, more strategic things. You know, you pick up the phone, it is absolutely, I need to speak to you right now. So actually some of the ways we've engaged with our good agencies over the years have actually enabled me to really understand how I can keep talking to people in a different way and actually get that kind of social side as well, and keep that coaching going. And I found that does work really well, as much as you can. And then you can also pick up, I think you can pick up where people are struggling as well. So there was a young lady in my team who I've got much closer to over this period. She was really struggling working at home, so actually in the end we arranged to have a meetup. And as our office started opening, she came into the office a little bit earlier than some others, so she could have that human interaction. So I think always, you know, think really hard about what tools there are available to you to connect with people. It's just us kind of ancient fogies who are used to sitting with each other in a meeting room in a coffee cup. Actually, you know, young people are very used to interacting digitally with their friends, and so I think we need to tap into that rather than expecting the world to come up with a new solution.
Well, I'm going to nip in here. Oh, sorry, go on, Jeremy, very quickly, because I've got a question from the audience here. But go on, you go.
I think those are great ideas, you know, from Rebecca, and you know, definitely really good behaviours. There is some sort of early research that I've sort of seen here, which shows that teams that have been quite effective at porting to online work, where they've already had quite strong bonds and they've already had that sort of human interaction. But there's a real challenge in terms of onboarding and bringing new talent in, or reforming teams and restructuring teams, and then it becomes sort of very challenging. And also, you know, the ability to, you know, for certainly for new people, but even existing people moving within an organization to have recognition, to be seen, to you know, for their skills and values, you know, to be seen across the organization. We've some other tactics we've been starting to use is to get some different staff to chair different meetings, for instance, not always be chaired by the manager or the boss, but try and rotate that, just to try and build the visibility of people that might otherwise not have that visibility across the organization. But I think as time goes on, this could be one of these things that becomes much more of a challenge, you know, and a team that knows each other and has already worked well together face to face, great, they can spend a few months, you know, sort of talking online like we are now. But if they don't know each other and they haven't got any reference point, and so many of those online conversations become very transactional. What you miss out is the socializing conversations. How's your kids? What did you do at the weekend? Did you see that last night? If you're missing out all that and relationships become built on business transactions only, then over time those bonds and the tightness of those teams start to weaken as well, and that's another big challenge.
I just want to bring in a question, because we are massively overrunning, but I did promise we would include some questions from the audience. I've got one here, so it's building on this current conversation, as they said. This is from Billy McKenna. Does the current economic / health environment make you think you'll use agencies more or less, i.e. more or less outsourcing? Rebecca, do you want to take that?
I will always use a PR agency, because I think it's always something that we've got a very good, strong in-house PR people as well, but actually I'd always use someone. I think their breadth of contacts and knowledge in different areas would mean to be the one that would be very inassailable in my book, and also their, you know, communications experts. If a PR agency is worth its salt, is already good at communicating through a number of channels, and so this shouldn't impact them at all. And I think if a client feels that actually they've seen some drop in service during COVID, I think one has to understand that people will, you know, individually have challenges and be respectful of those, but as an agency as a whole should be able to adapt to this, I would hope, fairly strongly.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. I've got one more question for you all, but before we do that, as I promised at the start, it's competition time. We've mentioned Tom's book a couple of times during this chat. He's very kindly given us a copy to give away. It's Futureproof Your Business. So one lucky viewer or listener, obviously. To be in with a chance of winning, you'll need to ensure you are following the C-Suite podcast on any of our social media channels. Go to csuitepodcast.com, click on the competition prize draw link at the top of the page, where you will need to answer this question that Tom is going to set. Over to you, Tom.
So how many traits did I say there were of an athletic organization? That's how many traits did I say there were of an athletic organisation?
There you go. Very simple. So remember, follow us on social, enter via the website, terms and conditions apply, etc., all linked from the competition page. Right, finishing off, what does the future hold? So our partners at the PRCA, our partners for this episode, so just a few weeks ago in June, they released the findings of a survey of agency and in-house leaders. I actually read about this on PR Week, and it found that the majority of respondents favoured a return to office life, but that 42% were either reluctant or had mixed feelings about it. And so in that article that I was reading, there were a couple of comments, and I just want to read through these, and then I'm going to come to you guys for your response. One agency head said they expect everyone to be back by September. And whilst they will allow more flexible hours and some days working from home, they felt it important to get that energy back for their teams. Then on the flip side, others reported that younger members of the team had moved back to their parents' homes outside of the cities, and so in some cases given up the leases on rented flats, and so are slow or reluctant to resume city-based working routines, and others even had a fear of using public transport. So what do you guys honestly think we'll see moving forward? Rebecca, you've just moved into your lovely shiny new offices in central London. You gave me a virtual tour on your laptop the other day. Are you expecting people to make full use of that great space?
Yeah, so we're in the process of moving between old and new offices in London at the moment, and we've already seen some people, really keen to come back. Actually, it's quite funny while I'm sitting here in the meeting with the glass door, and people keep walking past, going like this at me, and I'm like, kind of thing. I think I should put a post-it note on the door. People do like that human interaction, and I think with safety procedures in place, then people are comfortable at coming back. But I think there'll always continue to be flexibility where people will work from home as well, and I kind of see that kind of hybrid model, perhaps over-indexing towards the digital, maintaining permanently.
Jeremy, what's your thoughts?
I think with an organisation like the bank, we probably will, by and large, move back to office-based working. There's a lot built around the building and the physical manifestation of the bank, and where we are in Washington DC and in every country in the world, and that physical presence is probably seen as being important. And we're quite a conservative organisation. I think what it will do medium term is certainly drive forward more flexible home working, more regular home-based working. Hopefully managers will reflect that this has been quite a productive time, and they will take a different attitude, and hopefully we'll manage to maintain some of the stronger inclusion that we've seen, and be creative in some of the things we have learned over the last few months.
Great. Tom, last word with yourself on this?
Yeah, definitely the trend towards remote working is going to accelerate, but the short term, I think we're going to see quite a rapid snap back to old ways of working, while companies that don't have Octopus's culture work out those challenges. How do we do this well? How do we manage people remotely? How do we onboard people and maintain that sort of pastoral care role over our employees? All of those things need working out before we can make that wholesale shift to more remote work.
Tremendous. I just want to thank my guests. So once again, Jeremy Hillman, Rebecca Dibb-Simpkin, and Tom Cheesewright. Thanks also obviously to the team at the PRCA for inviting me to host this session. If you want more information on their COVID-19 task force, all the details are linked from their website at prca.org.uk. In the meantime, we hope you've got a lot out of this episode. We'd love to hear any comments you may have on this whole topic area of hybrid working. You can do that by contributing to the discussion, and all the links to all our social channels are on the top of our website at csuitepodcast.com. So please do contribute via the Facebook page, Twitter feed, or LinkedIn and Instagram pages. Also on the website, you'll find all the previous shows and supporting show notes, plus links to where you can subscribe for automatic downloads of each episode via your favorite podcast app. And if you enjoyed what you've heard, please do give us a positive rating and review. Finally, if you want to get in touch with the show, you can do that via the contact form on the website as well. You can connect with me on Twitter using @RossGoldsmith, or you can find me on LinkedIn. But for now, thanks for listening and indeed watching this episode, and goodbye.